Well, hello and welcome to the A Trip to the Moon podcast. Thank you very much for joining us. And that emergency podcast klaxon has gone out once again because, well, Tranmere have, I think, caught quite a lot of people, myself included, off guard this lunchtime by announcing that they've got a brand new manager who is the same manager as the previous manager who had been the interim manager. It's Nigel Adkins, who has got a 2.5-year deal and will be staying in theory until the end of the 25-26 campaign. And joining me to react to this, delighted to be joined by Nigel Adley. Nigel, great to have you back on. Were you caught off guard as I was by this news?
I was. When I got the text from you, sort of saying you were surprised, I was wondering what we'd done. And then I clicked on the club Twitter account and saw that Nigel Adkins had got the job. Not just got the job, but got the job on what seems to be a 2.5-year contract, effectively through to the end of 2026. And all the noises we were getting out of the club were that Nigel Adkins was holding the fort, didn't particularly want the job, was maybe taking on the technical director job as a favour to Mark Palios. And he's had numerous opportunities over the years to become the Tranmere manager and has never taken them. And now he has stepped up at a very difficult time. And he stepped up at a time when he's been in charge of the team and they've not been winning games. So it's a very interesting move. I would imagine he has put a long-term plan towards Mark Palios. And Mark Palios has said yes, but of course we heard your podcast last week with the owner saying that the club could be in new hands in a year or so, and now the manager is in charge until the end of 2026. So it's a very interesting situation.
Interesting is one way of putting it. I mean, my initial brain went to the negative part of it as to why have Tranmere once again appointed an interim manager who hasn't won that many games. And then I kind of clicked to the positive side of my brain and went, well, at least there's now some security. There is much more certainty. He will hold more authority within that dressing room because the players know that he is there for a significant amount of time. So it's a kind of, I guess, whether you're a glass half empty or glass half full kind of fan and the way that you're going to look at this.
Yeah, and if you look at the reaction on social media, of course, a number of people we know and a number of the usual suspects on social media, it's fair to say that the reaction has not been universally positive. And that's got a lot to do with the performances and the league position. But a lot of people have said there is clarity now. We know what's happening. And I think the players needed clarity because they're turning up working under an interim manager. And while he's somebody who's been around the club all season, they weren't knowing if someone else was coming in next week and what their position would be. He can now go into that dressing room and let everybody know what he thinks of them in terms of players and thinks of them in terms of the longer term picture. And we know there's got to be a big January going in and out of the club, and it has to be absolutely spot on this time due to the precarious league position. But now, at a relatively early stage, we do know where we will be for the foreseeable future. And it's Nigel Adkins, and we know how he wants to manage. We know his mindset, although I think even his sunny disposition has almost been broken by what he's seen on the field in the last few weeks. But at the same time, now there are no excuses, and that's from Mark Palios and Nigel Adkins downwards.
Already a message there from R. Alan Price. He says, I think this appointment could be a decent appointment if we avoid relegation. And that is the big if at the moment, given where Tranmere are in the table. But if you do want to get in touch, please do leave us a message on the comment bar. Let's have a look at what Mark Palios has said today then on the appointment. Nigel inherited a team which was severely depleted by injuries and lacking in confidence. And during his time in interim charge, we have still struggled to have a settled squad thanks to squad absences, whether that through injuries or red cards. We aren't yet out of the injury mire. In particular, we have Luke Norris, Jake Leake and Sam Taylor still to return to the starting lineup. But I have confidence that Nigel has the right blend of skill sets, experience, and importantly, passion for Tranmere Rovers to get us back on track and take us forward for the longer term. There are people, cynics, who will be listening to this, watching this, having seen that interview with Mark Palios a few weeks last week, Nigel, and said, what's the difference between Nigel Adkins and the other experienced managers that Mark Palios has described as failures? What would you kind of respond to that be?
And that will always be the comment which will be thrown back in his face now. And of course, he volunteered it, and it's something that he was happy to do, because Nigel Adkins has been sacked in the last decade or so. Of course, he had a terrific time with both Scunthorpe and Southampton when he was on the way up, and went all the way up to the very top in the Premier League. Since then, he took the Reading job almost on the rebound. They were relegated from the Premier League very quickly, although I don't think he would have saved them. He's also been to Sheffield United. He couldn't turn things around there in League One before Chris Wilder went in and did. Went to Hull City, and he left there of his own accord. I understand he was very popular there. And most recently, he was at Charlton, another big club in League One, and he wasn't able to turn things around. So you could argue he is from that pool of failures that Mark Palios was talking about. Clearly, on the other side, he's somebody who has vast experience. He has had success in his managerial career, and he loves Tranmere. And you've been banging on, ever since I've known you, that we need a manager with links to the club. Well, you would struggle to find anyone with stronger links than Nigel Adkins, going all the way back to making his debut this month back in 1982 as a 17-year-old. He's always had Tranmere as his club, as a fan and as a player, and now as the manager. And I think that's important. He knows what it means. He's of course, his family's always been in the area, and he's always been around the Wirral on and off throughout his career. But now, almost like Mark Palios coming back in 2014, he has taken on the job at an incredibly difficult time. And of course, with Mark Palios, we still went out of the league, but I think there were mitigating circumstances for that. Now, we simply can't afford to go out of the league. We have to stay up, because I think if we go down, we will be down there for a long, long time. And Nigel Adkins will know that more than anyone else.
I have to say, it does only add credence to the cheeky message I sent to you several months ago, that the plan all along was just to get Nigel Adkins in the building, having him turn down the job previously. He'd get a taste for it, and then eventually he'd want to take the job permanently.
Well, I think we said the night
happened.
Ian Dawes got the job that, or Nigel Adkins was appointed as well, that, by October, there was a good chance he would have the job. And of course, he had it by September. So it's not a surprise from that point of view. And I mean, looking at the messages going through now, do you think he'll appoint a new backroom staff from Phil? That's a very good question, because do things need freshening up off the field? And has he been given guarantees that he will be making changes? And someone else has also echoed the point I made, because if the club's in new hands within a year, what happens to Nigel Adkins? Because he has a contract now for 2.5 years. It's a statement of intent, and it's a statement of stability. And I think the best thing we can take from it is clarity, and that's something we've been asking for a long time.
I'm just trying to remember how long a contract Ian Dawes got when he was given the Tranmere job.
I don't think we were told.
No, I don't think either. In which case, I cannot remember a Tranmere manager being given a 2.5-year contract. Mickey got a 2-year deal when he came back in 2021 and lasted just over 18 months of that, or 21 months of that. Ronnie Moore, I think, was always on a rolling 1-year deal. I'm pretty sure Les Parry was on a rolling 1-year deal. I cannot remember a 2.5-year deal being handed to a Tranmere manager. So that in itself is quite a statement, especially when the results have been not as we would have hoped they'd be.
Yeah, and I suppose it's a long-term appointment. We've been accusing the club in many ways of making so many short-term moves on the field, certainly in recent times, short-term deals, players coming and going, and it never works. We've seen it previously back in 2014-15, notably. We've been at our best when players have been on 2-year deals. We were giving out 2-year deals in the National League. That meant we got a far higher caliber of player, and we were able to climb back into the league eventually, and then onwards towards League One. Now people know there is maybe a long-term plan there. There has to be long-term planning, because we bounced around so many managers in recent years. And we've always said it does nobody any good, because players come in, and also they will know, potentially, some players would know in the back of their minds, if you have a reputation for sacking managers, look, if his face doesn't fit in the dressing room, they'll be on their way. Now, the balance could possibly change, and it has to change. The strongest person in that dressing room has got to be Nigel Adkins. I think in recent years, the strongest people in the dressing room sometimes haven't been the manager, and it's never worked.
I do think it's a really interesting time now. It really is. I'm looking at some of the messages that are coming in. Matthew Williams there. Great appointment, in my opinion. I'll be surprised if he is allowed to bring his own backroom staff in, though, and then follows it up with wasn't Dan's given a long-term contract as well as assistant. Keith Bond, having a permanent manager is a good step in the right direction. He needs a good January window now. MDTV Games, there are far worse appointments we could have made. I'm kind of thinking, well, obviously, I mean, it's an obvious statement to say that his position is now stronger than it was 24 hours ago, given that he's the permanent manager. But actually, it really is significantly stronger than being interim manager. He can now make big judgment calls on players' future going into January and going into next season. He can, if he wants, suddenly start ripping up the starting lineup and throw players aside if he doesn't feel that they're pulling their weight. It's a real interesting time for him going forward, but I think it is a big positive move.
Yes, and I think now maybe it's significant as well, having heard what Mark Palios said to you last week and having spoken to Mark Palios over the years, he's got someone there he completely trusts now. I'm not saying in terms of football decisions, nothing else. And I think now I would hope that Mark Palios could possibly step away from some of those football decisions, which seem to have been made in recent years, and leave it to Nigel Adkins, because he was brought in as the technical director only a few months ago. And of course, that was a general overseeing job. I think now, when it comes to signing players, making moves within his backroom team, and the general style of play on the field, it's got to be down to the manager now. And I think that Mark Palios has got someone there, the caliber of person he believes can do that. And I think that will be important as well, because there are a number of priorities at the club, and Mark Palios needs to concentrate on those. I mean, people know, I think he's done overall, an excellent job long term, but we are where we are at the moment. And I saw someone on social media the other day say that Peter Johnson gifted him the club. Well, he gave him the ownership of the club, but the club that Mark Palios inherited was very different to the one that is there now. But this isn't an apology for Mark Palios. He can do that himself, as he did last week. But I think he has someone there now to try and offer some sort of long-term stability. And maybe he was determined to look around because he knew exactly that was the right type of person. And maybe during that time, it was a case of trying to persuade Nigel Adkins to take the job. And maybe he's been given guarantees, which means he can take the job, which possibly weren't there back in September or maybe back in May, because I feel that life would be a lot simpler for Tranmere Rovers, for all of us, if maybe Nigel Adkins had got the job in May.
I think a lot of people agree with that. And look, it is if I could, sit down with him, the one question, and I only had one question to ask him, I'd love to say to him, why now? Why are you taking this job now, when we're pretty certain, in fact, that you've been offered it in the past? We're pretty certain he was offered it in 2020 after Jackson got relieved of his duties. We're pretty certain there's been another occasion when that role has been offered to him and he's not taken it. I'd love to know why now. But if he's up for the fight, then, and he clearly is, that's absolutely fantastic.
It is. And I suspect that's a question he will be asked in the press conference, either before this game or after the game, because he's taken it on at a much more difficult time than it would have been maybe back in 2020 or even 2021 in the aftermath of the demotion and maybe taking over from Michael Jackson. Because if we go down now, it's on Nigel Adkins' watch fully, because although Ian Dawes started the season, Nigel Adkins has, I think, almost had as many games in charge now, maybe more than Ian Dawes did. So this is his season now, and he's got to own whatever happens. And I think someone said on the chat, what are his priorities? He's got one priority, and that's keeping us up. Anything else at the moment simply doesn't matter. And if we finish 22nd at the moment, I think he'll have done his job this season. He will then have to try and kick things on, and that could be under new ownership. Who knows? But maybe he knows who the new owners are going to be, and maybe that's why he's taken the job. I mean, we just don't know, do we?
Some really interesting messages coming in. Lots of them, in fact. I'm just going to read a few that have been sent on Twitter. Will O'Neill got in touch. He said, whatever has happened until now, and I have my views, as everyone does, Adkins is experienced and intelligent. He simply has to be backed in January. Without two centre-backs, amongst other signings, we're going down. And if we do, who the hell will want to buy the club? David Duckworth got in touch on Twitter as well. Difficult to see why he would have taken the poison chalice on without certain assurances regarding being allowed to bring in players that he wants to get us out of this mess. At least we now have clarity and a few more as well. David Hughes, Dawes was sacked for a similar points per game record to Adkins. I hate the phrase points per game after what happened in 2020. We've rewarded poor results with a 2.5-year contract. Just smacks of the easy option. And whilst giving some, and we can't just blame it on Norris being absent. We have a large squad. Rob Tyler, think he needs to bring in another coach to give the squad more experience. My concern is he is the one who probably brought the players we have in now. No way Dawes would have had the say. So we'll see what January holds. And there's a similar message from Ben Jones. We are a staff member down still. So hopefully he is allowed to bring a coach in. I mean, I'm not sure where a coach will fit if they are to bring in a new coach, because they've got Andy Parkinson as first team coach. They've got Neil Dans as assistant manager. Adkins was away from the first team, if that makes sense, in his role. He was technical advisor, so he was there really to give a bit of advice. He wasn't there to be in the dugout every match, and it'd be very unlike Tranmere to add another coach to the backroom staff, given they've already got 4 if you throw Joe Murphy in there as well.
Well, maybe he will make changes, and maybe he couldn't make those changes until he had the job permanently. And just thinking, listening to you reading the messages there, it's potential. Maybe the future new owners, whoever they're going to be, wanted to see some sort of long-term stability and wanted to see someone like Nigel Adkins in the post, because maybe that they would be quite happy to see someone like Nigel Adkins there and feel that they are someone they could do business with. Because after what Mark Palios said last week, I think the game has changed in many ways if you're a Tranmere fan, because we're aware that the club could be under new ownership over the next year or so, and we look a lot more stable with a permanent manager on a longer term contract than having an interim there, albeit someone who's got all the qualities in terms of experience and love for the club that we've spoken about. But the last time he managed at this level as a permanent manager, he was there very briefly when they were on the way up with Scunthorpe. But having spoken to him about that team going back, he said the secret was good players. And have we got enough good players at the moment to make a challenge? You would have to say on the basis of the results, we don't. So whatever happens this season, there is a massive, massive rebuilding job to do on the playing side. Now, that needs to start potentially in January, but whether we go up or whether we stay down, we have got to bring numerous new players in and maybe completely rip up the way we've done things in the past.
It's going to be a massive month, January. It really is. Some really interesting messages coming through. And thank you to all of you who are interacting. Phil Higby says, do you think the lack of response from the players has been due to the interim tag? And I certainly think that has been the case in certain matches, Nige, because there have been games where I've looked at them and thought they're coasting a little bit here. And as I said a few minutes ago, he now has the authority to properly stamp his own way on this team, and if he thinks a player's not pulling their weight, he'll tell them, and the player won't be able to come back to him and go, well, you're not going to be here in a few weeks' time.
Yeah, and he has made changes, clearly. I mean, people have been calling for players. People always look better when they're not playing in a struggling team, if you know what I mean. And he has, certain players have dropped out. And Sam Taylor hasn't played a huge amount in recent weeks. Whether he'll get a longer term opportunity now Nigel Adkins as permanent manager, we just don't know. But you look throughout the team. We signed experienced strikers at the start of the season. Of course, Norris has been injured, and Christian Dennis has had opportunities. Of course, started by playing in the wrong position, and when he's played over the last couple of weeks, he's not really done it. Now, whether the situation will change or whether Nigel Adkins believes he needs different players in January, we'll just have to wait and see, because you would hope now he's got the authority, but at the same time as having that authority, he's also going to have the backing as well. And I think you may have said it in the podcast that went out this morning, which has been out of date very quickly, that it'll be very difficult to move players on who aren't in a team that are bottom of League Two. Now, things may have improved by January. We hope they are. Now, they're going to have to try and do some business to move players out because the squad is too big, and probably 10 or 12 players too big, realistically. You tend to find that the most successful teams at this level don't have massive squads because everybody knows their jobs. At the minute, I would think he's struggling to get everyone on a training pitch. And that's not a good atmosphere to have off the field as well. So maybe they've just got to do some deals and tear contracts up. I mean, that worked with Kane Hemmings, clearly.
Well, let's
work for Kane Hemmings.
He scored his first goal for Stevenage at the weekend, didn't he?
And I wish him luck, all the best. And I would imagine he'll be keen to do well this weekend as well. But you look back now, that doesn't look great business, does it? If we let a player go to a team that's currently 6th in League One, who's playing in League One, and why couldn't he have done that for Tranmere?
Absolutely. Back to your point about the news show this morning going out of date very quickly. I swear that they announce things on a Thursday just to irritate us because the amount of shows that go out of date within a few hours of being released is quite staggering. Let's have a little look at what Nigel Adkins has had to say on this.
We'd definitely be going down if I was managing the team.
He says, it's an honour to take the manager's role at a club I previously played for and which is my hometown club. I have no illusions that we have work to do given our very poor start to the season. However, I would not have accepted this role on a permanent basis if I was not confident that we can put it right. The infrastructure and support that is in place at Tranmere Rovers is top quality, and with the support of the SWA, it gives us a strong foundation as we look to build momentum and move forward. One thing I will say, just scouring social media and looking at the response to Adkins getting the job permanently, certainly not quite as negative as when Tranmere last announced a permanent manager.
No, and that's understandable. I mean, we were all on your program, the live pod, the night Ian Dawes got the job, and we were basically saying various things about how things could improve and what could happen. But we all knew it was a terrible appointment, and it probably wasn't going to work. And sadly, everyone was proved right. And that is, that was the disappointing thing, that everyone knew it probably wasn't going to work. But that was also based on a fairly underwhelming spell as interim manager. Nigel Adkins comes into this job as a fairly underwhelming interim manager so far. Well, certainly the results have been underwhelming. There has been, I think, an improvement in attitude, but a lot of the performances have not been good. We've seen, is it 4 red cards in 5 away games away from home? I mean, that's got to stop for a start. And when he was a successful manager, particularly at Southampton, he clamped down very strongly on ill discipline within the squad. Maybe that's a difficult thing to do when you're the interim, but now he is the man in charge. It's his name on the door, and things have got to be done his way.
I was having a look through some of the squads that he had while he was at Southampton and while he was at Scunthorpe. It always completely skips my mind that he was Scunthorpe manager on the final day of the 2008-9 season when, of course, Scunthorpe drew 1-1 with Tranmere to usurp Tranmere and get the playoff place ahead of them. Also, I forget that Joe Murphy was a part of that squad as well. So Joe Murphy's someone who goes back with him a long, long way. And then I was looking at the Southampton squad. I mean, you say before that he had good players, or that was the secret while he was at Scunthorpe. His squad at Southampton, he had Oxlade-Chamberlain, he had Ricky Lambert,
Lallana.
He had James Ward-Prowse, Adam Lallana. I mean, if he's got a James Ward-Prowse and an Adam Lallana waiting in the wings somewhere at Tranmere, then we're going to be very happy for the next few years. But I can't see that being the case anytime soon. Big game this weekend for him to start with at Stevenage. And it is a big game regardless of being the FA Cup because, of course, the financial implications of it could be huge if things fall in Tranmere's way. So it's not as if he gets off with a free hit either.
No, it's going to be very tough. And we mentioned Kane Hemmings before, and I don't think we've ever had an easy game against a Steve Evans team. Of course, they started their promotion campaign at Prenton Park last season, and it was a massive surprise when we won there in February. Of course, we've not won away since. And it's the FA Cup. And, we've not had a decent run in the FA Cup since 2020, and in the last few years, it's been pretty grim. I know we got to the third round under Keith Hill, but it was all fairly low key. The fans weren't there, and we lost at Barnsley. But I think, does this change anything? You would hope it will. It's still going to be a very tough game, and if we do win, I know it's Stevenage, but it would be a shock because they're sixth in League One. They beat Derby 3-1 last week. You look at Derby's team in that division as well, and they're stacked with players, and they were outplayed by Stevenage. So it is going to be very difficult. Steve Evans may rest a few players, but the FA Cup's big for them as well. I mean, it really put Stevenage on the map when they were a non-league team going back 20 years or so. So it means an awful lot, and people can't say or can't afford to say, "Oh, no, we need to concentrate on the league." Of course we do, but at the moment we need to win games, any sort of games, even if it's a midweek game against an under-21 team in the Pizza Cup. We've got to get some momentum. We've got to get some confidence from somewhere, and it's a huge game. And I hope we get a reaction from the same players who were managed by the same man last week.
Before we wrap up, just to kind of slightly reword Paul Lawrence's question earlier, because Paul Lawrence asked, what are his priorities? And obviously, as you say, the priority is to stay up. It's as simple as that. But if I was to say to you, what are the top 3 things on Nigel Adkins' to-do list? How would you respond to that?
Well, stay up is number 1. You could say it's number 1, 2, and 3, but I take the point. I think prune the squad, and on as the same part of that, bring in more quality in January, but that's very difficult if you are at the bottom of League Two. It would be great if we could sign a holding quality midfielder, but they're very difficult to sign in January if you're going well. And of course, we haven't been going well. So getting the squad down to manageable numbers, of course, staying up is overarching. And I think as well, and he's ideally placed to do this, I think he needs to build a few bridges with the club supporters, not from him personally, but I think between the club and the fans, because I know there is often, arguments on social media between groups of fans who are called the happy clappers and groups of fans who maybe take a more negative view. And I think if people choose to support the club, they should be allowed to do that. If people aren't happy with things, of course, it's a democracy. They should say what they like as long as they're not being abusive. But I think everyone needs to come together now and just get behind Nigel Adkins and get behind the players and get through this season. And it will mean, I think Nigel Adkins maybe has to try and reach out and bring everyone together. He did that when he arrived, but I think even that's lost a bit of its luster in recent weeks due to results. But it all comes down to results. If we could pick up a couple of wins, particularly in the next 2 league games, then he's got that momentum to take into a very busy period around Christmas. So it all basically comes around staying up, and there's a variety of things he can do to do that. But I think that he's not been in this sort of situation for a long time, fighting relegation. Certainly never been fighting relegation at the foot of League Two. He did it as a player, or his re-election when he was playing for us right at the start of his career. He will be aware of what needs to be done now, and I think he should be left alone to do it.
Yeah, I agree with you on bringing the fans and the club back together. That was the thing that Mickey Mellon worked on ingeniously, really, because Mickey knew that he needed to build that bond, and Tranmere are absolutely at their strongest. I suppose it's the same for any club, but of course they're at their strongest when that bond between the club and the fans is strong, and they're working together as one, as we saw between 2017 really and 2019, and hopefully something like that can be rekindled. The January window is huge, isn't it? Just to touch on it, there's so many players that you could ship out, but are there going to be clubs who want to take them? How much money is there going to be in the purse to strengthen the squad? What are the priorities within the squad? I mean, personally, I know we saw a message earlier saying a couple of centre halves. I think they still need a centre midfielder, but they've got about 8 of them anyway. It's just they're all pretty much the same centre midfielder. So January and his ability to pull some strings with the contacts that he's got within the game will be absolutely mega.
I think if they've got it, sorry, Matt, if they've got to do some deals and end contracts by mutual consent and allow players to go, I think they have to do that. I know it's not easy. and we have to try and balance the budgets. But there is very little point in paying wages to players who you don't want to be there, because I wouldn't blame a player if you've got a year left on your contract and you're not being picked. Then you can sit there and you can take your money every week. And I know a lot of players don't want to do that because they want to play. But I think we might have to just bite the bullet on a few players and just say, thanks very much. Can we do a deal with you and your agent? And that will cost money, of course, but it will cost us even more in the long term if we can't bring players in or players come into a bloated squad. I mean, Damien has asked on the chat here. We have to ask how this mess with an oversized squad has been allowed to happen. And it's, it is a good question. I mean, how have we got 10 fullbacks and haven't got a decent holding midfielder seemingly? Where is the planning? There's been too many short-term decisions on the playing side in recent times. And that's why giving Nigel Adkins a 2.5-year deal, I think, is a good move, because he can sketch things out now, how ideally he would like things to go. Not just in January, but also in the summer as well, because that's going to be huge, because there could be a lot of players out of contract, and we'll be able to move them all on, get them out of the club as their deals expire, and then almost have a clean sheet. But we've got a lot to do before we can get to that.
And just finally, and this is my worry really, it has only been, I think I'm right in saying, 2 wins in 10 matches. It's been 4 defeats in a row. It's 9 away successive defeats, granted not all of them under Nigel Adkins. And he has still been handed a 2.5-year contract. What happens if this run does continue? What happens if in a month's time we're sitting in the same position and Tranmere have only picked up another couple of points and they've been beaten by one or both of Forest Green and Sutton and sit rock bottom of the table? There's almost no moves left to make then.
No, I think you're probably right. We've gone for a permanent manager and we've given them, in terms of League Two, a long-term deal. And I think it's something we had to do in the short term. I think maybe even Mark Palios saw the reaction to what he said to you on Friday and thought, we've got to have some sort of stability. We've got to start trying to win games. And maybe if he can't see anyone better than Nigel Adkins, then he has to have the job. But of course, this is Mark Palios' season as well as Nigel Adkins' season now, and he won't want another relegation on his CV as owner of the club. Of course, he was in charge when we went down back in 2015, but there were mitigating circumstances for that. This is his club now. We should have been by now, all things being equal, probably established as a League One club. The fact is, we're scrabbling around to avoid becoming a National League club again. And while we've had great stability off the field, and we are probably an attractive proposition to buy as a football club because there's very little debt, because the Palioses have been propping the club up in recent years, we are a lot less attractive, or we won't get the best possible deal we could if we are in the National League, because rather like Mark Palios, someone would have to come in and then spend even more money to try and sort that out. So it's a very interesting time. It could be argued it is the last throw of the dice, and we've just got to hope it comes up the way we want.
Well, he becomes, I think I'm right in saying, Tranmere's 15th permanent manager of this century. Good luck if you can name them all and in order. And I'm also pretty sure I'm right in saying he becomes the 8th permanent manager since Mark Palios took the reins in 2014. Granted, he didn't appoint Rob Edwards, but Rob Edwards, of course, managed under him. And within that, Mickey Mellon had 2 spells as permanent boss as well. So it's more managerial change, if you like, but also it's a little bit of the same given what's been happening for the last 2 months. And good luck to him. We all hope he's a success, eh?
Absolutely. Let's hope it starts on Saturday, but if not, then I've seen someone Ian say on the chat, we need minimum 4 points from Forest Green and Sutton. That is the heart of the job now in the short term. We have to get something from both of those games and use it to go forward, because we've got 2 stalwarts in charge of the club now who were both playing for it when the club was in a parlous financial state and almost falling into receivership. We're not in that state, but we could be dropping out of the league if we're not careful. And it's, they won't want it to happen. They're not absentee owners who don't care. I think that both Messrs. Palios and Adkins care deeply for the football club, and they've shown it in many ways with the move we've seen today. But they've just got to get it right.
They absolutely have. Well, let's leave it there. Thank you to so many of you for joining us on a wet, miserable Thursday lunchtime. Great that so many people are interested in hearing what we've got to say. And thank you to you, Nigel, for coming on at such late notice as well. We'll be back with a review of his first game in charge on Sunday. So sign up to the podcast for your £3 a month and you'll be able to hear all our thoughts on that game against Stevenage when we bring the show out on Sunday morning. We will speak to you then.